So there was at the time a pretty exciting moment in Final Fantasy history. It was around 2006 when Square Enix promised something huge. Something that would redefine Final Fantasy for the next, I don't know, decade or 12 years or entire generation and generations to come, a brand new mythology shared across multiple games. And it was a universe of kind of shared gods, crystals, fates, and sacrifice. And it was all connected by a massive internal lore Bible, basically. And it was called Fabula Nova Crystallis. And it was supposed to be the future. Instead, it became one of the strangest, most misunderstood, and ultimately unfinished ideas in the entire franchise. So today, let's look at the only question that matters. What the hell was Fabula Nova Crystallis? Okay, so correction. Fabula Nova Crystallis was not an actual shared universe. It wasn't meant to be like this MCU kind of thing where the characters crossed over or shared timelines. You wouldn't see lightning show up in Versus XIII kind of thing. Instead, it was meant to be a shared mythology. It was a set of gods and symbols and cosmic rules that different games could interpret in their own worlds. So, yeah, off the bat, that's already a little confusing. Square Enix compared it to how different cultures adapt the same myths into totally different stories. So the plan centered around 3 major games. Obviously, we have Final Fantasy XIII, which was the sci-fi flagship. You had Final Fantasy Versus XIII, which was a darker political tragedy. Then you had Final Fantasy Type O. It was Agito. Ended up being Type O when it was released. And this was a kind of war-torn, militaristic counterpart, side story-ish, compared to Versus 13 and 13. And I say side story because it was a little smaller in scope. But each game was meant to explore different aspects of the same mythic concepts, almost like it was almost like different authors or different playwrights or whatever writing stories inspired by the same god. So, Shakespeare writes about Jesus a certain way, and the Romans write about Jesus a different way, and even Islam writes about Jesus in a different way. But, it's kind of like that. And the mythology itself for Fabula Nova Crystallis was pretty dense, actually. You had Bonavels. I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but that was the creator god. Then you had Etra, which was very prominent in Versus 13 as a guardian of death and the afterlife. You have the Lassie, which was cursed with divine missions. Falsi, which was, these beings controlling the world behind the scenes. And you had this overall theme of cosmic cycle of rebirth and destruction. And the idea itself was pretty ambitious. Final Fantasy could become a mythos instead of just a series. But you'll see that ambition alone isn't really enough to carry this idea forward. So here's where it started to go wrong. I think Square Enix announced the Fabula Nova Crystallis mythology way too early. And it was really announced before any of the games were actually ready to release. So this was E3 2006. They showed these flashy CGI concepts that didn't even reflect the actual state of development. So at the same time that this is happening, the PS3 in the very early, at least in the first half of its life cycle, was a nightmare to develop for with the cell architecture, and that is well documented. And Final Fantasy XIII itself spent years hopping between engines and rebuilding core systems just from scratch. And Versus 13 suffered even more, and I got into the whole Versus 13 a couple videos ago. It never got stable development tools long enough to gain real momentum, and the team was put onto Final Fantasy XIV to finish that, Final Fantasy 15 eventually. So yeah, Versus 13 ended up being a mess. And Type O, it was forced onto the PSP. I don't know if it was literally forced on the PSP, but it was on the PSP. And that in itself just limits how many people are going to play it. It limits exposure, budget, and global availability. So as years passed with no real progress, Fabula Nova Crystallis slowly turned into a marketing ghost. It was a label attached to delays and these things that just didn't even exist yet, rather than this exciting shared mythology. And then Final Fantasy XIII launched and completely divided the fan base. Fair or not, it's not really the point of the video. 13's mixed reception created the perception that the Fabula Nova Crystallis FNC brand was flawed. And a lot of fans didn't even understand or realize there was a mythology behind it. I had heard the name Fabula Nova Crystallis. I thought personally at the time that it was like this MCU type thing, but it wasn't. And suddenly FNC, I'm not calling it FNC, that's stupid. The Fabula Nova Crystallis wasn't, the next era of Final Fantasy. It was basically the weird thing that was tied to Final Fantasy XIII. That's what it ended up being. Originally, 13 was supposed to be just one branch of the Fabula Nova Crystallis mythos. It was one interpretation of fate and gods and crystals among several planned games. But after its release, Square doubled down on the part that was already finished instead of finishing the rest. So obviously the decision was partly business reality. 13 sold extremely well. I was hyped for 13. I was pretty hyped for it. But it was also partly desperation because Versus XIII still wasn't ready. So instead of 3 different games exploring this mythology, we got Final Fantasy XIII-2 and Final Fantasy Lightning Returns. Both games expanded one specific corner of the mythos rather than diversifying it. So whether it wasn't intentional, I don't think, but it basically turned the Fabula Nova Crystallis thing into the Lightning Saga. It was the Final Fantasy XIII thing, which was never the original intention of the overarching plans. What was supposed to be a mythological anthology became a trilogy about one world, one hero, one heroine, and one cosmos. And that branding, which was supposed to be so big, it just shrank just to Final Fantasy XIII. Now here's the emotional centerpiece. The part that fans, not the pans, the part that fans still, myself included, still get pretty butthurt about. And I will put you to the video. I will put the card for the video up there-ish. But that is Final Fantasy Versus XIII. It was supposed to be this darker, more mature heart of the mythology. And it was aiming for this realistic as a Final Fantasy game can be, political tension and this kind of Romeo and Juliet / Hamlet tragic romance, and a grounded modern fantasy world inspired by like Tokyo and Shinjuku and European architecture. So basically the trailers for Versus XIII revealed this: Prince Noctis losing his kingdom, Stella as a mysterious rival figure connected to Etro, and also perhaps like a lover. We don't know for sure. A war-torn world shaped by ancient gods, an emphasis on death, fate, and sacrifice. And the tone, it's a tone that matched actually the movie Kingsglaive more than Final Fantasy XIII's sci-fi brightness, I guess. And it felt like Final Fantasy's version of a Shakespearean tragedy. It was stylish and emotional and very grounded. But behind the scenes, first off, the PS3 360 engine couldn't handle their idea. The team kept getting put onto like Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy XIV. They kept shifting directions with the leadership, and the project just had no stable development pipeline. And Versus XIII fell into development hell so deep that it eventually collapsed under basically its own ambition. Yes, it was rebooted into Final Fantasy 15, but they took Nomura off directing, and they stripped basically all of the Fabula Nova Crystallis mythology away. They took it out in the process of turning it into Final Fantasy 15. Stella vanished, Etro vanished, most of the original themes vanished, and with Versus XIII gone, Fabula Nova Crystallis basically lost its spine. It lost its center, because that was supposed to be kind of, along with 13, this king and queen crown jewels of the FNC mythos. Now, Type O, which is kind of the forgotten piece of this trilogy of games, was arguably the closest to what Fabula Nova Crystallis was meant to be. It was a brutal world with a bleak tone, and its use of the divine mythos was very direct and very unapologetic. The game showed gods that were influencing war, the very cool and awesome Alexander scene, nations that were manipulated by fate, and the cast, which was these 14 students facing literal annihilation. And no other Fabula Nova Crystallis game leaned so heavily into the cosmic cruelty of the lore that the lore was supposed to be about. But because it launched on the PSP and it was never fully realized worldwide until years later, I don't remember exactly when it came to console, but it was a little bit of time between mobile and console. It never really reached the mainstream audience that it deserved, and I need to go back and play it because I don't think I really got it the first time around, and I didn't beat it, but I've obviously seen a lot of trailers and gameplay, and I have my own experience with it, but I never beat it. And Type O became the kind of hidden chapter of the Fabula Nova Crystallis, saga or whatever, instead of a pillar. So in the end, why did it fail? Well, I kind of went over a lot of it, but let's do a clean breakdown. The tech at the time really couldn't support the idea. The whole idea of the Fabula Nova Crystallis required stable engines, which Crystal Tools was not, multiple teams, and a consistent pipeline of development, none of which Square had on the PS3. And the vision wasn't aligned. So different directors had different goals for this shared mythos, and there wasn't one strong unifying hand managing the entire thing. 3, the branding confused fans, and this is the one that I fall into. People thought the mythos meant shared world, leading to a lot of disappointment when the games felt disconnected. This was like height. Was it the height of the MCU? By the time 15 came out, it was. I think Iron Man came out in 2008. So it was around that time where we were thinking of media in this crossover world that we kind of live in. We're still living in today. 4, another one, a big one that I kind of fall into, is that 13's reputation basically wrecked and weighed down the entire brand. So even if players like 13, 13-2, the whole trilogy, or if they like Type O, a lot of people still associated the Fabula Nova Crystallis idea with 13's mixed reception. And then we have the last point, number 5. Versus 13's death broke the entire structure. And without it, the myth lost its most ambitious story, the one that was meant to show the darkest, most human side of the gods. And by the mid-2010s, Fabula Nova Crystallis wasn't a mythology anymore. It was just marketing. It was just a marketing label attached to the trilogy and a few side projects, basically. And Square quietly retired the name. And honestly, myself included, most people didn't even notice or care really by that time, and I didn't. But let's think about what could have been, because this is like the sad and bittersweet part of the whole thing is thinking about what could have been with this shared world. And I want you to imagine all 3 Fabula Nova Crystallis pillars releasing as intended. First off, let's do Versus XIII, which was this dark tale of destiny and doomed politics with a tragic romance at its core, very Shakespearean. And then we had Type O, which like I said, came close. It was a militaristic story about these warring nations that are being manipulated by these gods. And then you have the crown jewel, the biggest marketing push, which was 13, a sci-fi epic about rejecting divine control. And together, they would have explored the same mythology, but from 3 radically different angles. And it would have been the closest thing to a Final Fantasy multiverse ever attempted. Instead, the ideas were just scattered. Versus 13's plot got cannibalized and transformed and spit out as 15. Type O got buried under, the handheld kind of, it's not a stigma, but it's just a lack of availability, a lack of reach. And when it did come to consoles, it was like kind of people were just a little over it by then. And 13 had to carry the entire weight of the Fabula Nova Crystallis saga alone, and it kind of failed at it. We didn't get the mythic tapestry that Square envisioned. We got fragments of something that could have been incredible. But here's the twist. Fabula Nova Crystallis never fully died. Its DNA still appears in a lot of modern Square Enix titles. Elements of Versus 13 show up in Verum Rex and Izora and Kingdom Hearts. The theme of fate versus destiny is central. It's central to the Final Fantasy VII remake, whether you love it or hate it. I don't know. I'm somewhere in between. I want to love it. I don't hate it. This is different. So, and Nomura actually still teases the Fabula Nova Crystallis concepts across multiple series. Like I said, Verum Rex. Not so much the mythology, but a lot of 13's combat influenced 15 and even 16. And Type O's tone, I think, inspired a little bit of like Final Fantasy 16, a lot of these darker Final Fantasy stories. But a little bit of that spirit kind of still remains. If you want to be positive, if you want to be a glass half full kind of a person. So let's just wrap up here. What the hell was Fabula Nova Crystallis? It was a bold experiment. It was a massive creative swing and miss. And it was a mythology that was just too big for the technology, the timeline, or the company that tried to build it. And I think it was a failure. It wasn't a failure because it was bad. It failed because it was a little too ambitious. It was a little too ahead of its time. Because I do think Fabula Nova Crystallis was a gorgeous idea. Like one that is another kind of what if alongside Versus 13 of this time period in Final Fantasy history. And you guys know me. Final Fantasy IX is my favorite Final Fantasy. I love cheery, upbeat, hopeful stories. But I do think there is room in Final Fantasy for these darker, more mature, and just darker games, But that's just my take on the Fabula Nova Crystallis Bible, so to speak. Let me know in the comments if you guys wished this was fully fleshed out. Was this doomed from the beginning? Looking back on it, it's easy to say that. And do you guys like Type O? I want to know that because I played Type O for maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 hours, but I couldn't really, I don't know, it didn't click with me the first time I played it. And I never actually went back and played it. So let me know, because from everything I've read, Type O, and what I experienced, but it was a while ago, Type O got the closest to this kind of dark mythos. So let me know what you guys' thoughts are on Type O, Versus 13, the whole 13 trilogy. Leave it in the comments. Thank you for watching. God bless.